My sister snickered before the entire family. How do you like being worthless, sister? I gazed at her and replied. Felt never finer since I quit paying your expenses. Her grin faltered. The gathering stilled. My parents stiffened, then yelled, What? That's why. You know, Christmas is supposed to be about joy, family, and maybe a little magic. But for me, that year, it became the night my sister looked me dead in the eye, at our perfectly decorated family dinner, and sneered. How does it feel to be useless, sister? What she didn't know was that I had just stopped covering her entire life, and that one question was about to unravel everything. Sound of music stopping or changing to a more serious tone. The house was already glowing when I pulled into Mom and Dad's driveway. Every window warm and yellow, a beacon against the cold Midwest evening. Christmas lights, precisely measured by Dad like he always did, framed the porch. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out, the smell of pine and baked ham drifting towards me. I held the cake close to my chest, a simple, handmade thing, wrapped in parchment and twine. Nothing fancy, just honest. Inside, the house sounded like Christmas always had. Laughter bouncing off the walls, plates clinking, someone teasing about burnt rolls. Mom's voice floated from the kitchen, warm and busy, telling everyone to wash their hands and not touch the gravy. The living room tree blinked softly, ornaments collected over decades catching the light. Standing there, brushing snow off my coat, I felt that familiar tug of hope. Maybe this year, I thought, maybe we can just sit down and eat without anything breaking. Then I heard Belle's laugh. It was loud, confident, the kind that fills a room and pulls all attention towards her effortlessly. She was already there, of course. She always was. Sitting at the head of the table beside Dad, legs crossed, sweater perfectly pressed, hair done just right. She was telling a story about traffic and some client she used to have, her hands moving as she talked. Everyone was listening, rapt. She looked exactly like the person our family was used to being proud of, put together, unbothered, fine. I stepped fully into the room and set my cake down on the counter. The parchment was plain. No store logo, no plastic dome, just flour on the edges and the faint smell of vanilla. And I saw it happen in real time. Belle's eyes flicked to the cake for just a second, long enough for something to shift behind her smile. That's when she leaned back in her chair, still smiling, still performing, and turned toward me. Her voice carried easily over the table. How does it feel to be useless, sister? The room didn't stop immediately. There was a half second where laughter lingered, where someone thought it was a joke, where a fork scraped against the plate. Then it all stalled, like a record skipping. I felt it before I thought it. My chest went quiet. My hands stopped shaking. It was like something in me clicked into place. I didn't feel small. That surprised me. For years, moments like that would make my stomach drop, my face burn, my mouth open with an apology I didn't know. This time, my body went still, calm in a way that felt unfamiliar and steady. I looked at Belle, really looked at her. At the tightness around her eyes, the way her smile waited for the reaction it expected. Before I answer, just pause for a second. When you're listening to this right now, what are you doing? Sitting at your kitchen table with coffee, folding laundry, driving somewhere familiar? For me, when this happened, I was standing in my parents' dining room on Christmas evening, holding nothing but my breath and that simple cake, realizing my life was about to split into before and after. I set my hands on the back of a chair and spoke evenly. My voice sounded strange to my own ears because it did not waver. Never felt better, since I just stopped covering your bills. The silence that followed was not polite. It was heavy, stunned, the kind that presses against your ears. Belle's smile collapsed as if someone had pulled it away from her face. Across the table, Mom froze with the serving spoon still in her hand. Dad's eyes moved from Belle to me, then back again, his brow furrowing like he was trying to solve a problem that suddenly had no numbers. Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. His voice cut through the quiet, sharp and unguarded. What bills? Why? Every face at the table turned toward me at once, my aunts, my uncle, cousins who had stopped mid-bite. Even the little lights on the tree seemed to flicker slower. I could feel all of it. The weight of their attention, the years of assumptions hanging in the air. I had imagined this moment more times than I could count. In the shower, lying awake at night, driving home from work. In every version, I was shaking, crying, defending myself. This version was different. I felt planted, like my feet had grown roots into the floorboards Dad had refinished himself years ago. Belle laughed again, but it was thin and quick, nothing like before. She waved one hand as if to brush it off, eyes darting toward Mom and Dad. Oh my God, she said, trying to keep it light. She's being dramatic. You know how she gets. Dad did not sit back down. He did not smile. He looked at me and waited. Not angry, not yet. Just confused and deeply unsettled. Mom set the spoon down slowly, her face pale in a way I had never seen before. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and slow. I realized then that Belle had said what she said because she had seen the cake and panicked. Because something about that small, quiet, handmade cake threatened the story that she was fine, that everything was under control, that she was still the one everyone leaned on. I hadn't planned to say anything at dinner. Not tonight. Not like this. But when she laughed at me, when she called me useless in front of everyone, something inside me refused to bend anymore. The smell of ham and cinnamon filled the space between us. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere in the house, a timer beeped, forgotten. No one moved to turn it off. Rayon, Dad said, his voice softer now, but with an underlying steel. What bills are you talking about? I opened my mouth to answer, aware that whatever I said next would change everything. Aware that there was no putting the cake back in the car, no rewinding the night. Every eye stayed on me, waiting. I looked at Dad, and for a beat I couldn't make my throat work. Not because I was scared, but because my mind flashed through every version of Belle my parents had ever loved, every version I had ever believed in. And I realized how hard it was going to be to pull that image off the wall in front of everyone, and show what was behind it. If you had asked anyone in our family who was the steady one, the successful one, the kid who had it figured out, they would have said Belle without even thinking. She was 38 now, the oldest, the first grandchild Mom could brag about. Belle was the reason Mom kept a stack of Christmas cards with glossy family photos by the phone. She'd pick one up and tap it like proof whenever she talked to her friends. My oldest is in marketing. She'd say with that proud lift in her voice, like she was telling the world she'd done motherhood correctly. Belle used to dress like her life was a meeting, even when it was just lunch. Clean lines, neat hair, nails done. She had a way of walking into a room that made people turn, not because she demanded it, but because she expected it. When she got her first big job, Mom threw a dinner. Dad grilled steaks even though it was still chilly outside, because Dad always believed you celebrated with work and food and showing up. Belle sat at the table with a glass of wine like she belonged there, talking about her office downtown, about projects and deadlines and clients. I remember watching Dad's face. He didn't say much, but his eyes stayed on her the way they did when he watched something he built. Like her success was a sturdy thing he could trust. When she got promoted, Mom told everyone. When Belle traveled for work, Mom posted pictures she'd been sent and acted like she'd taken them herself. When Belle bought nicer furniture, Mom talked about it like it meant our whole family had stepped up in the world. Belle became the story our parents wanted to tell. She was proof that hard work paid off. Proof that our family was doing fine. And in fairness, Belle did work hard. I'm not going to pretend she didn't. She was sharp, organized, quick with words. She could charm the right person and shut down the wrong one without raising her voice. If there was a problem, she could look you in the eye and make it sound like you were both on the same side, even when you weren't. That kind of skill gets you far in an office. It also gets you far in a family. I was different. Not worse, just different. I was 32, the quiet one, the one who took the steady route. I worked as a project coordinator in healthcare administration, which is a fancy way of saying I kept a lot of moving parts from crashing into each other. I made schedules, chased approvals, smoothed over misunderstandings, handled details so other people could do their jobs. Nobody claps for that kind of work. They just notice when you stop doing it. In our family, that was my role too. I didn't cause trouble. I didn't ask for much. I brought what I could, and I made sure things stayed calm. When Mom got stressed, I listened. When Dad got quiet, I didn't press him. When Belle got dramatic, I gave her room, because giving her room always seemed like the safest option. There's a kind of child a family builds a story around. And there's a kind of child a family leans on. Belle was the story. I was the lean. It sounds bitter when I say it like that, but it's just true. If Belle missed a holiday dinner, everyone acted like the whole day had been damaged. If I missed, Mom would sigh and say she understood, and then she'd ask me to bring the rolls later. Belle could be late, and it would become a funny story. I could be late, and it would become a question, are you okay? Is it too much work? Why are you so tired? Even my successes felt like background noise compared to hers. When I got my job at the healthcare network, Dad said, good for you. When Belle got a new title, he asked questions. What does that mean? How big is your team? What's your next step? Dad isn't cruel. He's just built a certain way. He respects visible progress. He respects something you can point to. Belle gave him something you could point to. That's why this moment at the table felt so impossible. My parents didn't know who they were looking at anymore. Dad was staring at me like I had suddenly spoken a language he didn't understand. Mom's face was tight with worry, but also with confusion. Because confusion is what happens when the family script goes off the rails. The truth is, Belle had always controlled the script. Even when we were younger, she knew how to frame things. If she forgot something, it became a mistake anyone could make. If I forgot something, it became a lesson about responsibility. If Belle snapped at someone, it was because she was stressed. If I snapped, it was because I was too sensitive. Belle learned early that if she spoke first, people listened. So, she spoke first. She always spoke first. That's what she did tonight too. She saw my plain cake, my quiet entrance, and she spoke first. She did it so everyone would look at me and nod at her. She did it so she could feel higher for a moment. She did it because she needed to, because that word, useless, wasn't really about me. It was a shield she held up between herself and the questions she couldn't answer. I could feel the room waiting, but inside my head, it was suddenly years earlier. The way it always is when you realize something has been happening longer than you wanted to admit. I saw Belle at Thanksgiving, joking about how I was always so careful with money, always so boring. I saw her at a birthday dinner, teasing me for bringing handmade gifts instead of buying something bigger. I saw her leaning into those little jabs like they were harmless, like they were just sister stuff. But now I could see what they were really doing. They were placing me lower. They were setting a stage where she stood on top, smiling. And nobody asked why. And I realized something else, something that made my stomach tighten even as I stayed calm. Belle had been able to get away with it because nobody suspected her of needing anything. That was the whole point of her image. A woman who is doing well does not need help. A woman who is doing well does not borrow money. A woman who is doing well does not hide or lie or ask her little sister to keep secrets. So if Belle was the woman doing well, then I had to be the one doing poorly. That way, anything that happened behind closed doors could stay behind closed doors. That way, if I looked stressed or tired, people would assume it was my fault. Work, choices, life, whatever. Not hers. That's why the word, useless, cut so deep. Not because it was true. It wasn't. It cut deep because it came from the person my parents trusted most. The person everyone believed. The person who had been treated like the stable center of our family for as long as I could remember. Belle sat there now, her shoulders still squared, her chin lifted like she was trying to keep that old version of herself intact, but her eyes were not calm. Her eyes were sharp and fast. Watching Dad, watching Mom, watching my aunts and uncle, calculating. The smile was gone. And for the first time in a long time, I saw what lived underneath it. Fear. Hot and restless. Dad's hands were on the back of his chair. He wasn't yelling anymore, but the tension in his jaw told me he wanted answers. Dad doesn't like surprises. Dad especially does not like financial surprises. He came from a generation that saved, paid bills on time, fixed things instead of replacing them. He still keeps every warranty in a drawer. If a light bulb burns out, Dad replaces it immediately. Order makes him calm. Belle was not order. Belle was a storm dressed like sunshine. Mom's fingers twisted in the edge of her apron. Mom was looking at Belle like she was trying to recognize her. She was also looking at me like she was seeing me in a new light. And I couldn't tell if that made her guilty or just scared. My Aunt Tamsin's eyes moved between us, wide and careful, the way they get when someone senses a family secret and doesn't know where to place their hands. My uncle cleared his throat once, then stopped as if he realized there was nothing he could say that wouldn't make it worse. Belle finally spoke again, her voice higher than before, too bright. She tried to laugh it off. I was joking. Come on, it's Christmas. She looked at Dad and Mom with a pleading kind of smile, like she was asking them to put the old script back on the table and pretend it was still good. But I couldn't. Not after what she had said. Not after what I had just admitted. I looked at Dad, and then at Mom, and something settled in me, like a decision becoming solid. Belle had spent years being the one everyone believed. Tonight, I was going to be the one who told the truth first. I drew a breath, feeling the warm air of the dining room fill my lungs, smelling pine, gravy, and the faint sweetness of my cake waiting untouched on the counter. My voice came out steady, because I had carried these words alone for too long. Dad, I said softly. I can explain. I just need you to let me finish. Dad nodded once, slow and stiff, and held up his hand, not to stop me, but to quiet the room the way he used to do when we were kids and Belle and I started talking over each other. Go on, he said. So I did. I told them it didn't start the way they probably imagined. There was no big confession, no dramatic breakdown in front of everyone. It started small, in the middle of a year when everything felt like it was slipping out of people's hands. The year when the streets went quiet and everyone learned how fragile their world plans really were. Back in the spring of 2020, when offices shut down and the world felt like it was holding its breath, Belle called me late one night. I remember it clearly because I had just finished washing the dishes in my apartment, and was standing at the sink, staring out at an empty parking lot. The phone lit up with her name, and for a second I hesitated. Belle didn't usually call late. She was a planner. Calls with her were scheduled, purposeful. This felt different. When I answered, she didn't say hello right away. I heard her breathing first, uneven and shaky, like she'd been crying and was trying to pull herself together. Then my name came out, soft and broken in a way I had never heard from her before. I could picture her even before she spoke more, sitting on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, shoulders hunched, eyes red. The confident voice she used so easily with everyone else was gone. She sounded small. She told me the company had let people go. She said it like it was a bad phrase she didn't want to say out loud. Laid off, downsizing, restructuring, all the words people used that year to soften the same hard truth. She said her position had been eliminated, not because she did anything wrong. She was very clear about that. It was just the economy, just bad timing. I remember leaning against the counter, my stomach dropping, because Belle losing her job did not fit into the picture I had of her. She was the one who landed on her feet. She was the one who always had a plan. She rushed through the rest, talking fast now, as if speed might keep the fear from catching up to her. She had some savings. She was already applying. She had contacts. This was temporary. She kept using that word, temporary. She said she just needed a little help to get through the gap, just rent for a month or two, maybe utilities, nothing big. And then her voice cracked again. And she said the part that made my chest ache. She said she hadn't told Mom and Dad. She couldn't, not yet. Mom would panic. Dad would worry. They had already been through so much that year. She didn't want to be another problem they had to carry. She asked me not to say anything. I stood there listening, watching my reflection in the dark window, and all I could think was that this must be killing her. Belle hated appearing weak. She hated needing help. If she was calling me, it must really be bad. I asked her how much she needed. I asked her when she thought she'd be back on her feet. She gave me answers that sounded reasonable. A few weeks, a couple of months at most. She said she had interviews lined up. She said she was embarrassed even asking. I told her I would help. I didn't hesitate. I didn't ask for proof or details. She was my sister. She had always been the one ahead of me. If she said she was stumbling, I believed her. I told myself this was what family did when things got hard. The first transfer felt strange, like stepping into shoes that weren't mine. I remember staring at my bank app, checking the numbers twice, making sure I could afford it. It wasn't easy, but it was possible. I told myself I'd tighten things up for a while. Skip a few extras, work a little more. I pressed send. Belle stopped crying immediately. The shift was so quick it almost startled me. Her voice steadied, and she thanked me over and over. She said she knew she could count on me. She said I was a good sister. She said this would never become a thing, just a bridge until she landed. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of my couch and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I felt useful then. Not in the way Belle would later throw the word at me, but in a quiet way that made sense to me. I was helping someone I loved. I was doing something concrete. In a year full of things no one could fix. The weeks that followed were strange for everyone. Offices stayed closed. Interviews moved online. Time stretched and folded in on itself. Belle would text me updates every now and then, a promising conversation, a company that froze hiring at the last minute. Each message came with reassurance. She was close. She just needed a little more time. I didn't tell Mom or Dad. Not because I thought they'd be angry, but because I believed her when she said she wanted to tell them herself once things were settled. I didn't want to take that from her. I didn't want to make her feel smaller than she already did. I kept working. Healthcare administration did not slow down during that time. If anything, it sped up. Long days, constant changes, new rules every week. I was exhausted. But I told myself it was temporary, too. Everything was temporary then. Or at least, that was what we all told ourselves to keep going. When Belle called again a month later, she sounded calmer. Not happy, but composed. She said she was still looking. She said the market was rough, but she had savings. She was being careful. She asked if I could help with one more payment. Just one more. I said yes. I didn't feel manipulated. I didn't feel used. I felt needed. And in a family where I had always been the background, that feeling carried a quiet power. Sometimes she would apologize before asking. Sometimes she wouldn't. Sometimes she would talk about how frustrating it was to be home all day, how she felt invisible without her job. I listened. I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me, I told her it would get better. I meant it. Looking back now, I can see how carefully she framed everything. How she always reminded me this was temporary. How she always emphasized that she would pay me back. How she always circled back to how ashamed she felt. Shame is a powerful thing. It makes people protect it. It made me protect her. At the time, none of it felt wrong. It felt like standing under someone else's roof during a storm, holding it up until the weather passed. I believed the storm would pass. That's the part one wanted them to understand. Standing there at the Christmas table, every eye still on me, I didn't step into this blind. I stepped into it trusting the version of Belle we all believed in. I thought I was helping my sister stand back up. That belief carried me for a while. It made the extra hours feel like something noble instead of something draining. It made every transfer feel like a temporary patch instead of the start of a pattern. And for the first couple of months, it really did look like a bridge. Belle kept saying she was close. She kept saying interviews were happening. She kept saying she hated asking. Then the requests started changing shape. At first, it was just rent. And then it was, "Could you cover the electric bill this month, too?" She said she had to keep the lights on because she was doing interviews from home and couldn't risk a shut-off. The way she said it made it sound like I would be letting her future collapse if I said no. I covered it. I told myself it was practical. It was just electricity. It wasn't forever. A couple of weeks later, she texted and asked if I could send a little extra for the internet. She said the connection in her apartment was spotty, and she needed to upgrade her plan to stay competitive. She wrote it like a business problem, like she was still the marketing manager who could turn anything into a strategy. I sent it. She replied with a string of thank you messages that made my chest loosen, like we were still sisters, like I was helping. Then there was the credit card. She called, and her voice was tight, controlled, like she was trying to keep emotion from spilling out. She said she had a card payment due and she had miscalculated. She said it would hurt her credit if she missed it, and she couldn't afford to mess up her credit right now, not with landlords and jobs. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, bills spread out in front of me, and feeling something shift. Not yet suspicion, but wait. Like the bridge was getting longer. I asked how much? She told me. I hesitated for 1 second, just one, and she heard it. Her tone sharpened immediately, still quiet, but sharper. She said, "I know you think I should have planned better, but you don't understand what it's like when everything falls apart at once." She said she was already humiliated. She said she didn't need judgment from her own sister. So I paid for it. After that, the requests came with rules. Not written out like a contract, but spoken like a warning. Do not tell Mom and Dad. She said it every time. Sometimes she said it softly, like a plea. Sometimes she said it like a command. She said Mom would worry herself sick. She said Dad would look at her differently. She said they had enough on their plate. She said, "I'm handling it. I just need time." She said, "I'll tell them when I have good news, not when I'm drowning." There was always a reason that made me feel cruel for questioning it. And there was always shame. She leaned on that word like it was a shield. She said she was ashamed of being unemployed. She said she was ashamed of needing help. She said she was ashamed that she had worked so hard and still ended up here. She said it like she expected me to save her from it, not just with money, but with silence. So, I stayed quiet. I stayed quiet because I thought silence was kindness. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to break the version of Belle my parents loved. I stayed quiet because, if I'm honest, there was a part of me that wanted to be the one she trusted, the one she leaned on, the one who mattered. I didn't notice at first how that silence started changing me. It showed up in small ways. I stopped buying little things that made my weeks easier. I stopped ordering lunch at work. I made coffee at home and carried it in a travel mug that always leaked. Little, I told myself. I'm being responsible. I told myself it was just for now. I told myself I could handle it. Healthcare administration during that time was relentless. We were short-staffed and constantly adjusting to new policies. I stayed late. I picked up extra tasks. I took calls I didn't have to take. I told my boss I could handle it. I became the person who said yes before anyone else could ask. When people say family comes first, they don't always talk about the quiet cost. The way it creeps into your body. The way it makes your shoulders tense even when you're sitting still. The way your heart beats faster when your phone lights up because it could be another request, another emergency, another crisis you didn't create. Belle would call, and I would answer before the second ring. If I missed a call, she would text, "Please call me back when you can." And the words would feel heavier than they should. Sometimes she would add, "It's important." And my mind would start racing. I'd picture eviction notices, shut-off warnings, late fees stacking like bricks. I would call back and brace myself. Half the time it was something that could have waited, but she never let it wait. That was part of it. If everything was urgent, then I never had space to think. I tried once to create space. It was late summer, still hot outside, the kind of evening where the air sticks to you. I had just gotten home from work, shoes off, hair pulled up, standing in my kitchen, looking at the groceries I'd bought carefully within a budget. Belle called and asked about the next payment. Not rent, she said, but the utilities plus the card plus one more thing. She said she needed to renew something online, a subscription. She said it was necessary for job searching. I took a breath and said something I'd been practicing in my head for weeks. I said, "Belle, maybe we should tell Mom and Dad. Maybe Dad can help you make a plan. Maybe Mom would rather know than be kept in the dark. Maybe this is getting bigger than just a short gap." There was silence on her end for a moment. Then her voice changed. Not crying, not soft. Cold. She said, "Do you want to ruin me?" I blinked like I'd misheard. I said, "No, of course not. I just think they would want to know." She said, "You don't understand. Dad will never look at me the same. Mom will make it about her and her anxiety, and I will have to manage that too." She said, "You want to make me disappointed in the family so you can feel better about yourself?" That hit me like a slap. It was so unfair that my first instinct was to laugh, but my mouth stayed closed. I felt my face heat up. I told her that wasn't what I meant. I told her I was worried. I told her I couldn't keep doing this forever. Her tone softened just enough to feel like a trap closing gently. She said, "I knew you would make this about you." She said, "I'm the one living at Rannon. I'm the one who has to wake up and feel like a failure every day. You get to go to work and feel stable. You don't know what it's like to watch your life fall apart." Then she sighed like she was exhausted by me. She said, "I didn't want to ask you in the first place. You offered. You said you would help." She said, "I will remember this. I will remember that when I needed you, you made me beg." I felt my stomach twist. Not because I believed she was right, but because I could hear the old dynamic clicking back into place. Belle on top, framing the story. Me underneath, scrambling to prove I wasn't selfish. So I backed down. I told her I was sorry. I told her I didn't mean to add stress. I told her yes, I would send it. She exhaled and said, "Thank you," like she was granting me forgiveness. After I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time. My hands were shaking a little. And that was when I realized something that scared me more than the money. I realized I was afraid of her disappointment, afraid of her anger, afraid of being cast as the bad sister. That's not normal. Not when you're both grown women, not when you're just trying to be honest. I started noticing how Belle talked about secrecy, like it was love. Like keeping her secret was proof I cared. She would say things like, "You're the only one I can trust." And it would feel like a compliment. Then she would say, "Don't tell anyone." And it would feel like a responsibility. Sometimes she would call, and her voice would be gentle again, almost sweet. She would ask how I was doing. She would mention something funny she saw online. She would tell me she missed the old days. Then right when I felt my guard lower, she would slide in the ask. "Can you cover this too? Just this one. You know, I would do it for you." I wanted to believe that last part. I wanted to believe she would do it for me. But a small part of me kept whispering that she never had. Not really. Not when it mattered. Belle was good at being present when it made her look good. She was not good at being present when it was messy. I told myself that thought was petty. I pushed it down. I pushed down a lot. I pushed down the resentment when I saw her post photos online smiling on a patio, even if the drink in her hand was just lemonade. I pushed down the confusion when she talked about ordering takeout like it was normal, even though she told me she was barely surviving. I pushed down the little sting when she made jokes about my careful spending, about how I was always so serious. She would laugh and say, "You worry too much." And I would look at my bank account and swallow the truth. There's a very specific kind of loneliness that comes from carrying a secret that's not yours. It isolates you from everyone in the room. You sit at family dinners and smile, and you know something the others don't. You watch your parents laugh and relax, and you know they wouldn't be relaxed if they knew. You become the keeper of a reality nobody asked you to hold. I kept it because Belle made it sound like I was protecting them. Protecting Mom's nerves, protecting Dad's pride, protecting the holiday peace. The way she said it, it almost sounded noble. But the longer it went on, the less noble it felt. It started feeling like a trap that tightened every time I tried to pull away. By the time the first year had passed, I wasn't counting months anymore. I was counting payments. I could tell you exactly when her rent was due, when the utility bills hit, when the card payment was posted. My life started orbiting her calendar. And through it all, Belle kept wearing her confidence like armor. Even on the phone, even in tears, she never let herself sound too weak for too long. She always swung back to control. She always reminded me that telling anyone would be betrayal. She always found a way to make my help feel like my obligation. I told myself it would end when she found a job. I told myself it would end when the world settled down. I told myself it would end because it had to. That's what I told myself. And standing there at the Christmas table, watching Dad's face as he waited for my explanation, I realized just how long I had been telling myself that, and how much of my life I had rearranged around the hope that my sister would eventually stand up on her own. I took another breath, and I could feel the whole room holding theirs with me. But before I could explain what the money had become, I had to explain how I found out it was no longer going where I thought it was going. For a long time, I believed every dollar I sent was keeping a roof over Belle's head and the lights on in her apartment. I pictured rent checks, utility balances, boring adult expenses that added up, but made sense. That picture is what allowed me to keep pressing send, even when my own chest felt tight. The first crack in that picture came quietly, not with a fight or a confession, but with a notification. It was a random afternoon, sometime in the middle of another long workday. I was eating lunch at my desk, scrolling through my phone the way people do when they need a mental break. Belle had posted something, not a photo of herself, not a quote, but a screenshot. It flashed across my screen for less than a second before my brain registered what it was. Numbers, charts, green and red lines climbing and falling sharply. I stared at it longer than I meant to. She had captioned it with something vague about learning and staying disciplined. Nothing that outright said money, nothing that would alarm anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. But I did know enough to feel my stomach drop. That night, when she called asking about the next transfer, I asked her about it. I tried to sound casual. I asked what that chart was. She laughed, quick and dismissive. She said it was just investing. She said she'd been teaching herself some things while she had time. Forex, crypto, stuff like that. She said it was smart to diversify. She said everyone was doing it. Her confidence was immediate and practiced. The same tone she used when she talked about campaigns and strategies back when she still had her job. She made it sound responsible, progressive, almost impressive. I asked if she was putting a lot of money into it. She said no. She said just a little. She said she was careful. She said she would never gamble. That word came out sharp, like an insult. I'm not stupid, she said. I know what I'm doing. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something in my body did not settle the way it usually did when she reassured me. The image of those charts stayed with me. The sharp drops, the sudden spikes. It did not look like slow, careful investing. It looked like adrenaline. I didn't push that night. I told myself it wasn't my place. She was already defensive enough about money. I didn't want to add another layer of tension. But once the thought was there, it didn't leave. Over the next few weeks, little things started to stand out. She would mention being up late watching markets. She would text me at odd hours, excited or flat in a way that didn't match what she was saying. Sometimes she sounded wired, talking fast, jumping from one idea to another. Other times she sounded hollow, like she was reciting lines she had practiced. One afternoon, I ran into Noah Greer at the grocery store. Noah was an old family friend, someone who had known us since we were kids. He worked as an independent financial advisor, the kind of person who explained things calmly and never tried to impress anyone. We chatted about work and weather. And then, without planning to, I mentioned Belle, just casually. I said she was between jobs and had been talking about trading online. Noah's expression changed immediately. Not alarmed, but serious. He asked what kind of trading. When I said Forex and crypto, he nodded slowly. He didn't say it was evil or reckless. He said something quieter, something that stuck. He said, for some people, it starts to look less like investing and more like gambling. He said the problem isn't just the losses, it's the pattern. When someone loses, they feel the urge to get it back. They chase the loss. They tell themselves the next move will fix everything. He said the brain responds to wins and losses the same way it does to a slot machine. He said, the market doesn't care how badly you need it to turn around. I drove home with his words echoing in my head. That night when Belle called, I asked her more directly. I asked how much she had put in. She deflected. She said I was overthinking it. She said I sounded like Dad. That stung, because she knew exactly what that comparison would do to me. She knew I didn't want to sound controlling. She knew I didn't want to be the one lecturing her. She said this was actually good news. She said she had almost made back what she had lost earlier. She said she just needed a little more time to get it right. Lost earlier. That was the first time she admitted there had been losses. I asked her if the money I was sending was going into those accounts. She paused. Just long enough. She said no. She said not directly. She said it all blended together. She said money was money and she was managing it. She said I was focusing on the wrong thing. That was the moment fear entered the room. Not panic, not anger, but fear. The kind that settles low and cold and makes everything else feel unreliable. I realized I didn't know where my money was going. I realized I was trusting someone who couldn't clearly explain what they were doing with it. A few days later, she called with urgency in her voice. She said there had been a bad move. She said the market was volatile. She said she could fix it, but only if she acted fast. She said she needed help to cover things until it turned back around. I asked her how much. She told me. The number made my chest tighten. It was more than usual, not outrageous, but not small. Enough that I would feel it. Enough that I would have to shuffle things again. I told her I was worried. I told her this did not sound like just paying bills anymore. Her reaction was immediate. She accused me of not trusting her. She said if I had any idea how close she was to turning it around, I wouldn't hesitate. She said this was the last push, the last move, the last chance. She said if I didn't help her now, everything she had worked for would be gone. I could hear the edge in her voice, the desperation wrapped in confidence. It was the same pattern Noah had described, unfolding right in front of me. Lose, chase, just one more. I said I needed to think. She didn't like that. She said thinking was a luxury she didn't have. She said hesitation was how people miss opportunities. She said I was being negative. She said she thought I believed in her. That last one landed hard. Belief had become currency. If I believed in her, I paid. If I didn't, I was the enemy. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment, phone in my hand, heart racing. I opened my banking app and looked at the numbers again. I looked at the savings account I had been slowly building. I looked at the credit card balance that was higher than I liked. I looked at the calendar and counted the days until my next paycheck. I told myself that if this really was the last push, then helping her one more time would actually end things. I told myself that if I didn't help and she lost everything, I would never forgive myself. I told myself that family meant showing up even when it scared you. So I sent the money. Afterward, I didn't feel relieved. I felt sick. The next few weeks were a blur of updates that went nowhere. She said the market was unpredictable. She said she had almost broken even. She said things were turning around. She also said she needed help with rent again. The words almost broke me. That was when the truth finally settled into place. Heavy and undeniable. I was not helping her stabilize. I was helping her survive the consequences of something she could not stop doing. My money was not a bridge anymore. It was padding. It was cushioning her from hitting the bottom. I remembered Noah's calm voice. The way he had said the brain chases losses. I remembered how Belle sounded when she talked about the next move, the way her voice lifted with hope that was too sharp to be real. I realized then that the help I thought I was giving was actually enabling her to keep going, not toward a job, not toward stability, but deeper into something she could not control. Standing there now at the Christmas table with Dad waiting for my explanation and Mom gripping the edge of the counter, I felt that realization burn through me again. This was not about rent or electricity or a credit card. This was about a pattern that had swallowed my sister and pulled me in with her. And the worst part was knowing that I had kept feeding it because I believed I was saving her. I looked at Dad and Mom, and for the first time, I understood that what I had been doing was not rescuing Belle from falling. I had been helping her hide how far she already had. I swallowed and drew in another steady breath, knowing the next part would be harder to say out loud. Because once I realized my money was not saving Belle, it was hiding her. I started looking for answers the way I do at work. I stopped trusting feelings and started following patterns. I started asking myself questions that made my stomach twist. If she was using my money to plug holes, how many holes were there? If she was asking me to keep it secret, who else was she asking? I didn't find out in one dramatic moment. I found out the way people usually find out family secrets, in pieces, through small slips and accidental hints. It started with a phone call from my Aunt Tamsin. She's Mom's sister. Practical, no nonsense, the kind of woman who always has paper towels in her purse and never lets anyone leave her house hungry. She called me one afternoon and asked how I was doing. Her voice had that careful softness people use when they want to say something but don't want to make it worse. I told her I was fine. That was my automatic answer. Fine meant I was still standing. She paused and then asked almost casually if Belle was doing okay. I said she was between jobs and trying to figure things out. Tamsin made a small sound like she was weighing her words. Then she said, Belle asked me for money last month. Just a little. She said it was for rent. She asked me not to mention it to anyone because she didn't want Mom and Dad to worry. My whole body went cold. Not because Belle had asked for help, but because she had repeated the same line, the same script, the same request for silence. I tried to keep my voice steady. I asked Tamsin how much. She told me. And it wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to matter. Enough to mean this was not a one-time favor. Enough to mean Belle was building a web. I asked Tamsin if she had told anyone else. Tamsin said no. She said she felt uncomfortable, but Belle sounded so embarrassed, so desperate. She said she didn't want to cause drama. She said she figured Belle would tell Mom and Dad when things got better. Tamsin said she didn't want to take that choice away from her. I thanked her for telling me. My voice sounded far away to my own ears. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at the wall for a long time. That was the moment I understood that my silence was not protecting Belle. It was protecting whatever Belle was doing. After that, I started noticing everything. A cousin mentioned that Belle had been stressed lately and had asked about short-term loans. An uncle made a joke about how everyone needed a bailout these days, and I laughed like it was funny, even though my hands were sweating. Mom told me in passing that Belle had been calling more often, sounding tired. Mom said she was worried, but Belle always insisted she was fine. Fine. That word again. I called Belle and asked her directly if she had borrowed money from Aunt Tamsin. She didn't deny it. She didn't even sound surprised that I knew. She sounded annoyed, like I had violated some agreement. She said yes, but it wasn't a big deal. She said Tamsin offered. She said it was just temporary. She said I shouldn't be calling around about it like some kind of detective. I told her I wasn't calling around. I told her Tamsin called me because she felt uneasy. Belle snapped that Tamsin was dramatic. She said people always overreacted when money was involved. She said I was making her feel worse when she was already struggling. Then she lowered her voice and said the words she always said, the ones that tightened around my throat like a rope. Don't tell Mom and Dad. Please, I'm begging you. I asked her why she was begging me when she should have been talking to them. She said, because they wouldn't understand. She said Dad would judge her. She said Mom would worry herself sick. She said she could handle it if everyone would just stay out of it. Stay out of it. As if it had nothing to do with me, as if I hadn't been carrying it for years. At that point, I told her I needed honesty if I was going to keep helping. She agreed, for about a week. Then something else happened, something that made my skin crawl with a kind of dread I had never felt before. It was a Sunday afternoon when I drove out to Mom and Dad's house to help Dad with something in the garage. Dad likes doing things himself, but he's also the kind of man who pretends he doesn't need help until he does. He had texted me that morning, simple and direct, come by if you have time. I need a second set of hands. When I got there, Dad was in the garage, surrounded by tools and holiday storage bins. The radio was playing softly, and he had his sleeves rolled up. Mom was inside making soup, the kind of soup that always tastes like safety. I helped Dad move a heavy box, and then Dad wiped his hands on a rag and asked me how work was going. I told him it was busy. He nodded like he expected that. Then he said something that stopped me. He said, Belle asked me about my retirement account last week. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I tried to sound casual, like it was nothing. I asked what she wanted to know. Dad frowned. He said she was asking questions about penalties and withdrawals. He said she was talking fast, like she had a lot on her mind. Dad said he told her not to touch retirement money unless it was an emergency. Dad said she told him it was an emergency, but she didn't explain. I heard the blood rushing in my ears. I forced myself to breathe. I asked Dad if he had given her any money. Dad hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before he said a word. He looked away just slightly, toward the shelves. Then he admitted he had helped her. Not a lot, he said quickly. Just a bit. He said she promised she would pay it back when she got on her feet. He said she asked him not to mention it to Mom because Mom would worry. I felt my knees go weak. I gripped the edge of the workbench to steady myself. Dad, I said, and my voice sounded strange, tight, like it was coming from someone else. How long has this been going on? Dad frowned again. He said it was recent. He said she asked once a few months ago, and then again more recently. Dad said he thought he was just helping her through a rough patch. Dad said he didn't think it was a big situation. I could barely hear him over my own thoughts, because it was a big situation. It was bigger than I had even allowed myself to name. If Belle had reached into Dad's retirement money, it meant she was desperate in a way that scared even her. It also meant she was willing to break lines that should not be crossed. Their retirement money is not a casual loan. It is not a quick fix. It is the future Dad had spent decades building with careful choices and early mornings, and saying no to things he wanted because he believed in security. I asked Dad how much. He told me. And it was enough that my throat tightened. Enough that I knew it wasn't. Just a little. Dad watched my face, and his expression changed. He said, Wait, why are you looking at me like that? He said, Rayhan, do you know something? I wanted to tell him right then. I wanted to spill everything and let the truth take its own shape. But Mom walked into the garage at that moment with a tray of bowls, smiling, asking if we were hungry. Her smile faded when she saw my face. She asked what was wrong. Dad said nothing at first. He just looked between us, and I could see the instinct in him to keep the peace. The instinct to postpone conflict until later. The instinct that had probably let Belle operate for so long. I lied. Not fully, but enough. I told Mom I was just tired. I told her work was a lot. I told her I was fine. There was that word again. Fine. Like a blanket thrown over something burning. That night after I went home, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone in my hand. I stared at the call log. I stared at Belle's name. I didn't call her right away. I needed to make sure I wasn't imagining things. I needed to make sure I wasn't reacting to fear. So, I started gathering facts. I pulled out my bank statements and scrolled back month by month. I made a list of every transfer. I wrote down dates. I wrote down the amounts. I compared them to messages from Belle, to the days she called crying, to the days she acted like it was no big deal. I highlighted patterns. I circled words she used over and over: temporary, just this once, don't tell Mom and Dad. I did the same thing people do when they are trying to prove to themselves that what they have lived is real. I collected evidence. Not for court, not for revenge. For sanity. Once I saw it on paper, I couldn't unsee it. It was not a rough patch. It was a system. Belle would borrow from one person to cover what she owed another. She would pull from me, then from Aunt Tamsin, then from Dad, and then she would call me again. She kept each person separate, each secret isolated, so no one could see the full picture. And I realized something that made me feel both relieved and sick at the same time. I was not the only one, but I was the one she leaned on the longest. The deepest. The one she used as her foundation, while she kept her image polished for everyone else. That realization didn't make me feel better. It made me feel raw. Because it meant all those nights I thought I was saving my sister, she was building a ladder out of my money and climbing back onto her pedestal. It meant she could sit at a Christmas table years later and call me useless without flinching because she had trained herself to believe her own story. The next time Belle asked me for money, I didn't answer immediately. I let the phone ring. I watched it light up, and I felt something new rise in me. Not guilt, not panic. Anger. And clarity. When I finally called her back, I asked her one question. I asked her how many people she had borrowed from. She got quiet. Then she laughed. That thin laugh she uses when she feels cornered. She said, "Why are you asking that?" She said, "You're acting like I'm some criminal." I told her I knew about Aunt Tamsin. I told her I knew about Dad. Her voice snapped sharp. She said I had no right to. Christmas approached, the tension thickened. Belle stopped calling me directly and started acting normal in the family group chat. She sent cheerful messages. She joked. She posted pictures online that made it look like she was doing just fine. I knew what that meant. She was shoring up her image, getting ahead of the story. When Mom called to confirm plans for Christmas dinner, I felt a knot form in my stomach. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I also knew I couldn't force the truth out in a private conversation where Belle could rewrite it later. I didn't plan a confrontation. I didn't rehearse speeches. I just knew that when we were all in the same room, something would give. On the drive to Mom and Dad's house that night, with the handmade cake on the passenger seat and the folder of documents in my bag, I felt strangely calm, like someone who has already crossed the hardest line. I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I knew this Christmas dinner was going to be the moment everything Belle had built on silence finally met the light. And once it did, there would be no going back. The light was already there, warm and bright in Mom and Dad's dining room, bouncing off the polished wood table and the crystal dish Mom only brought out on holidays. It made the whole scene look almost too pretty for what was happening. A twinkling tree in the corner, candles on the sideboard, plates lined up like a postcard. And in the middle of it, Dad standing with his chair pushed back, Mom frozen near the counter, her face turned toward me like I was the one who had shattered something sacred. Dad's voice was still hanging in the air. "What bills?" "Why?" Belle sat very still, hands folded too neatly in her lap, like she could hold herself together by force. Her eyes were fixed on me, sharp and warning, but I didn't look away. I had lived too long under that look. I reached into my bag slowly. I didn't want to move fast. I didn't want anyone to think this was a stunt, or that I was enjoying it. I pulled out a plain folder, the kind you buy in a pack at the office supply store, and placed it on the table in front of Dad. The sound of it landing was small, but in that room, it felt loud. Dad looked down at it like it might bite him. Mom's hand pressed against the counter, and Tamsin's mouth parted slightly as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find a safe way in. My uncle shifted in his chair. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Forgotten. I kept my voice calm on purpose. Not cold, just steady. I had learned the hard way that if you sound emotional, people hear emotions instead of facts. I said it started in the spring of 2020, when Belle lost her job and didn't tell you. I said she called me and asked for help. Just temporary. And she asked me not to tell Mom and Dad because she was ashamed and didn't want anyone to worry. Mom made a small sound like she was going to interrupt, but she stopped herself. I continued. I said I helped because I believed her. I said it started with rent, then electric, then the internet, then credit cards. I said the requests didn't stop when a month passed. They became a habit. Dad's face tightened. He didn't blink. Dad is not a man who cries easily, but he does have a look that appears when something hits him in the deepest place. It is the look of a man realizing the rules he lived by don't apply in the room he is standing in. Belle gave a short laugh, trying to cut through my words. She said, "This is ridiculous. She's exaggerating. It's Christmas. She's making a big deal out of nothing." I did not argue with her. I did not trade insults. I did not raise my voice. I simply slid the folder toward Dad and told him to look. Dad hesitated for 1 second, like he was hoping this would go away if he didn't touch it. Then he opened it. Inside were printed statements, transfers highlighted, pages labeled with dates, and a simple timeline I had typed out in plain language. I hadn't decorated it. I hadn't added dramatic words. Just the facts. Month by month, request by request, amount by amount, notes about what she said each time, notes about the condition that always came with it, don't tell Mom and Dad. Dad's hands trembled slightly as he held the first page. He read it slowly. The room stayed silent except for the faint hum of the heater and the distant sound of Christmas music from the living room. Mom leaned forward, her eyes scanning the pages from her spot by the counter. She didn't touch anything yet, but her face changed as she recognized the pattern. You can always tell when Mom is counting in her head. Her lips pressed together, and her eyes narrow. She was counting. Aunt Tamsin stood up without speaking and moved closer to the table as if her body needed to see what her ears were hearing. She looked down at the highlighted lines and then up at Belle, and something in her expression hardened. Dad looked up at me. His voice was quieter now. He asked, "How long?" I told him it went on for years. I didn't use a number. I didn't need to. The pages already said it. Dad's eyes flicked to Belle. He asked if it was true. Belle's cheeks flushed. She lifted her chin and tried to sound offended. She said, "People help each other." I offered. She said, "Rayon is acting like a victim because my life is boring and I need attention." Mom stepped forward then, finally leaving the counter. Mom's voice was shaky but sharp. She asked Belle if she lost her job. She asked why she didn't tell her. She asked why she let her believe everything was fine. Belle rolled her eyes. She said, "I didn't want to stress you out, Mom. You worry too much. You would have made it worse." Mom flinched as if she had been struck. It was a small flinch, but I saw it. Mom hates being told she is the problem. She hates it because she fears it might be true. Dad held up one page and frowned. He pointed out a line and asked what this was. He asked about a payment labeled as an emergency credit card bill. He said he thought Belle's job covered that. He said he thought she had savings. Belle's eyes started. She said, "I had savings. I was just trying to be careful. Things were complicated." Dad turned another page. His jaw tightened. He asked me, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" That question stung in a different way now, because I could see he meant it. He wasn't accusing me. He was accusing himself. He was picturing all the moments he had praised Belle. All the times he had taken her confidence as proof she was okay. I answered honestly. I said, "Because she told me not to. Because I thought I was protecting you. Because I was ashamed too. I didn't want to be the reason the family fell apart." Mom let out a small sob, and for a second I thought she might collapse. Then she straightened, and her face changed. Her eyes focused on Belle with a steadiness I had not seen before. Mom asked Belle one simple question. She asked why she called Rayon useless when she had been living off her. Belle's mouth tightened. She said, "I didn't mean it like that. It was a joke." Mom shook her head slowly. She said, "That is not a joke. That is cruelty." Belle looked at Dad then, searching for rescue, for a softening, for the old script where Dad tries to calm things down and move on. Dad did not rescue her. Dad looked exhausted, older than he had looked at the start of dinner. Dad said he needed to understand the full scope. He asked Belle if there was anything else. More loans, more people, more accounts. Belle's eyes dropped to the table. For the first time, she didn't fight back. She didn't throw another insult. She didn't perform. She simply stared at the wood grain like it might give her an answer. That was when I realized something else. Belle was not in control anymore. Not of the room. Not of the story. Not of the way people saw her. The silence that followed was heavy and final. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just real. The kind of silence where everyone is thinking the same thought, but no one wants to be the one to say it. Belle's shoulders sank slightly, as if the weight of pretending was finally too much to hold up. Dad's hands stayed on the folder. Mom's tears kept sliding down, quiet and steady. Aunt Tamsin's arms folded across her chest. My cousins stared down at their plates. No one ate. No one reached for the gravy. The whole Christmas dinner sat untouched. Like a scene that had lost its purpose. And in that stillness, Belle was no longer the person with the perfect sweater and the confident laugh. She was just a woman who had run out of people to hide behind. Every eye in the room drifted back to me. Not because I was the villain, but because I was the one who had finally said the thing no one wanted to hear. I stood there with my hands at my side, feeling the strange calm that comes when the truth is already out and there is nothing left to protect. Dad inhaled slowly, then looked at me again, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked me how much I had paid. I opened my mouth, and the room waited. I told Dad the total. I said it slowly because it deserved to be heard clearly. I said it had grown over time, month by month, until it became a number that no longer fit into the idea of help. It fit into something else, something closer to survival. Dad closed his eyes, not tightly, not in anger, but like someone pressing pause because the picture in front of him is too much to take in all at once. When he opened them again, they looked different. Dimmer. Worn. Mom did not ask for the number again. She did not need it. She was already adding it up in her own way. She was seeing all the small sacrifices she and Dad had made over the years. The trips they postponed, the extras they skipped, the careful planning that now felt violated. Belle sat very still. She did not interrupt anymore. She did not laugh or scoff or try to redirect. Her silence was not calm. It was empty. Dad pushed the folder back toward me and said he needed a minute. He stepped away from the table and went into the living room. Mom followed him without a word. Their footsteps sounded heavy on the hardwood floor. No one spoke while they were gone. Not a whisper, not a sigh. It was as if the room itself understood that whatever came next would not be reversible. When Dad came back, he did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the chair like he might need it to stay upright. He looked at Belle and said he was disappointed. Not angry, not yelling. Disappointed. He said it the way parents do when something breaks that cannot be fixed with time or excuses. He said he could not help her anymore. He said he would not lend her money, cover bills, or protect her from consequences. He said he needed distance. He said he did not want to see her for a while. Mom nodded beside him. Mom's voice was quiet but firm. She said she loved her daughter, but she could not be part of this anymore. She said she was done being lied to. She said she needed space to process what had happened. She said she did not trust Belle right now. Belle finally reacted. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair back. She said, "You cannot just cut me off. You are my parents. You are supposed to help me." Dad shook his head. He said, "Help is not the same as enabling." He said he wished he had learned that sooner. Mom wiped her face and said she hoped Belle would get real help. She said she hoped she would talk to someone. She said she couldn't watch this anymore. Belle looked around the table, searching for an ally. Aunt Tamsin did not meet her eyes. My cousins stared down at their plates. My uncle sighed and shook his head. No one stepped in. That was the moment Belle realized there would be no rescue. She grabbed her coat and stormed toward the door. She said we would all regret this. She said we would see how cruel we were when she disappeared. She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The tree lights blinked quietly in the corner. Christmas music kept playing in the other room, cheerful and absurd. No one chased her. That night ended without dessert, without gifts, without closure. People hugged awkwardly and left early. The house felt hollow when it was finally just Mom and Dad and me. Dad sat at the table long after everyone else had gone, staring at the wood grain like he was trying to memorize it. Mom cleaned dishes that had barely been used. Her movements slow and methodical. I stayed until everything was done. I didn't know what else to do. The days that followed were quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Belle did not call. Not me, not Mom, not Dad. The family group chat went silent. I later learned that she had tried. She had reached out to a cousin first, then an uncle. The answers were polite but firm. No one sent money. No one offered to smooth things over. Without our help, the reality she had been avoiding came fast. She lost her apartment within weeks. Not dramatically. Not with an eviction notice taped to the door, but with a quiet decision she could no longer postpone. She moved into a small room in a shared house across town. The kind of place you rent when options are limited and privacy is a luxury. She still did not stop trading. I know that because she texted me once late at night a few weeks after Christmas. She didn't ask for money. She sent a message about how close she was to turning things around. She said she just needed one good move. She said the market was about to shift. I did not respond. Without our money cushioning her, the losses hit harder. She burned through what little she had left. She took a job waiting tables at a diner near the highway. Long hours, unpredictable tips, no benefits. The kind of job she once would have mocked. The kind of job she had laughed at people for settling into. I did not feel satisfaction when I heard that. I felt sadness. Not the soft kind, but the heavy kind that sits in your chest and does not move. Mom and Dad did not go looking for her. They did not call to check in. They did not send money quietly behind the scenes. Dad said he needed to protect what was left of his peace. Mom said she needed to grieve the daughter she thought she had. That distance was the hardest consequence of all. I did not ask Belle to pay me back, not because I didn't deserve it, but because I did not want my life tied to hers anymore. I did not want my future anchored to her recovery or her failure. I sent her one message, just one. I told her I was not sending money anymore. I told her I hoped she would get help. I told her I loved her, but I was done rescuing her. She replied with anger first, then with silence. That silence stretched into weeks, then months. At first, it felt strange not being needed. My phone felt lighter in my hand. My days felt longer. I noticed how much space had been taken up by waiting for the next call, the next crisis, the next guilt trip. Without that noise, I could hear my own thoughts again. I focused on work. I slept. I started saving again, slowly, carefully. I said no to overtime I didn't need. I said yes to rest. Mom and Dad started rebuilding, too. Not financially, but emotionally. Dad took walks in the evening. Mom joined a community class. They did not talk about Belle much. When they did, it was brief and careful. The absence lingered, but it no longer ruled the house. Belle's life shrank to match the reality she had avoided. Fewer options, fewer people willing to listen, fewer places to hide. She still tried to perform strength online, a smiling photo here, a vague post about resilience there. But the comments grew quieter. The attention faded. There was no dramatic downfall, no public apology, no grand lesson delivered, just consequences. The kind that don't shout, the kind that settle in and stay. I learned something during that time that no amount of arguing could have taught me. Karma does not need revenge. It does not need spectacle. Sometimes it just needs people to stop interfering. By stepping back, I let Belle meet herself without a buffer, without my money softening the impact, without my silence protecting her image. The silence that followed became the loudest response of all. And in that silence, I finally had room to breathe. I did not fix my sister. I did not save her. But I saved myself. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The word useless stayed with me long after the house went quiet again. It echoed in small moments when I was alone. When I was folding laundry or driving home from work, when there was no one around to perform strength for. I kept turning it over in my mind, not with anger, but with curiosity. What did she really mean when she said it? I realized something slowly, the way truth usually arrives. Useless was never about what I did or did not contribute. It was a label, a tool, a way to keep me small enough to stay, helpful enough to keep giving, quiet enough to never question the role I had been assigned. As long as I believed I was useless, I would keep trying to prove otherwise. With money, with silence, with loyalty that cost me more than it should have. Once I stopped believing it, the whole structure collapsed. Life after that Christmas did not become perfect. It became simpler. And simpler, it turned out, was a gift. My finances stabilized in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. Without the constant outflow, my checking account stopped feeling like a crisis waiting to happen. I paid down what I needed to. I rebuilt my savings slowly, without drama. Watching that balance grow again felt grounding, like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been on loan for too long. At work, my focus returned fully. I stopped second-guessing every pause in my concentration. I slept better. I laughed more easily. My manager noticed the difference, and told me I seemed lighter. I didn't explain why. I just smiled. Mom and Dad changed too. They didn't become cold people. They became clearer ones. They stopped making excuses for behavior that hurt them. They stopped smoothing over problems just to keep the peace. It was not easy for them, especially for Mom, who had spent most of her life believing love meant sacrifice, no matter the cost. One evening, months later, Mom told me something quietly while we were washing dishes together. She said she wished she had learned earlier that protecting your child does not mean protecting their lives. She said she was sorry she had not seen what was happening sooner. I told her she did the best she could with what she knew. That was true. Dad did not say much about it. He rarely does. But one afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch watching the sun drop behind the trees, he told me he was proud of me. Not for what I had done for Belle, but for knowing when to stop. That mattered more than I expected it to. As for Belle, I did not check on her, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for the boundary I had drawn. Every time I felt the urge to step in, to fix something, to soften a consequence, I reminded myself that stepping back was the kindest thing I could do for both of us. She had to meet herself without a buffer, without someone absorbing the impact for her. From what I heard through distant channels, she struggled. She worked long shifts. She moved again to an even smaller place. She still talked about turning things around, about opportunities just around the corner. I hoped, genuinely, that one day she would face what she was running from. But that day was not mine to create. I did not hate her. Hate would have tied me to her story longer than necessary. I let go instead. Letting go did not feel dramatic. It felt quiet. It felt like choosing myself over and over again in small ways. Saying no without explaining, declining calls that felt unsafe. Trusting that I did not need to justify my boundaries to anyone who benefited from breaking them. I learned that family does not get a lifetime pass to harm you. Love is not measured by how much pain you are willing to endure. Silence can be protective when it is chosen, not forced. And truth, once spoken, does not need to shout to be powerful. Sound of serious music fading in slightly, then transitioning to a more reflective, hopeful tone. If you've ever been told you were too much, or not enough, for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I've told you what I did, and what happened next. Now I'm really curious, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was constantly taking advantage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm reading everyone.